Hello and welcome to CEO Stories, the podcast series from the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. Each episode, I explore the journey, inspirations and motivations of some of the region's leading and up-and-coming chief executives. I'm Henrietta Brealey, Chief Executive of the Chamber, and this time I'm joined by Deborah Hazell, Chief Executive of the Unity Trust Bank. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So, for those who are perhaps less familiar with you and Unity Trust Bank, do you want to start by telling our listeners just a little bit about you?
About me. Let me start off by saying a little bit about Unity Trust Bank, and then I'll tell you a bit about me because the stories sort of come together. So Unity Trust Bank is a fairly small bank based in Birmingham, and it has a double bottom line. So one bottom line is obviously the commercials, and then the other bottom line is social impact. So everything that we do has to have a social impact. That is what drives us as an organization. So a little bit about me. I'm English, but I have lived in New York for the last 30 years. I have an investment background. I've 35 years in investment management. And I decided a few years ago, that I wanted to do something sort of quote unquote more meaningful. So I decided to take a master's degree in international development to learn much more about sort of development in the world and so forth. And I'm a fairly international person anyway, hence the international part. So finished that just as COVID was coming, so in 2020, left banking in 2020, finished my master's in 2020, spent a wonderful year just doing very little actually. And then I thought, you know what, now it's time to really start focusing on taking myself on a journey where I can have some impact. And this opportunity came along. So I told myself that I was geographically agnostic. This happened to be in Birmingham. So I said yes. And here I am at the bank doing exactly what I want to do, which is trying to better society. So the two combination of finance and impact.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have picked a more perfect job, could you? Combining that financial expertise and social impact. But if we were to travel back in time and talk to, let's say, 10-year-old Deborah, what would she think about what you're doing now?
Oh my God, she would have no clue about what it is I'm doing now. She would have no idea about banking. As a youngster, I was, I probably thought a little bit at that age about being a vet because I love cats. So like a fairly sort of typical journey. Never really occurred to me to go into banking. As I finished my A-levels, then because maths is one of the things I was studying, actually two of the things I was studying. Then everyone was saying, oh, go into accounting or something like that. And I actually applied to be a psychologist at university, but part of my journey, failed my exams, didn't get to college. So I decided just to sort of stop making my way in life. And I fell into banking at the age of 19. I fell into banking, and then the rest of the journey, as they say, sort of took its path from there. But the 10-year-old me had no clue. In fact, the 16-year-old me had no clue either. So there's all sorts of paths open that we might not have anticipated when we were younger.
Absolutely. And how did that falling into banking happen? What was that first job for you that sort of opened up this whole pathway?
So the very first job was I was a door-to-door carpet cleaner. So clearly that didn't lead me into banking. And after two years of working in that role, I thought I needed to get serious about life and actually get an office job. So my only criteria was to work in an office. So I applied for a few roles, and a bunch of things actually did come up. But then I saw this advert in one of the national papers, which it caught my eye, and I just kept on thinking about it over the weekend. And I thought, there's a reason I'm thinking about this. So I applied for the role. And they wanted 3 grade A-levels, which is not what I had at all, quite the reverse. But I decided nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I wrote a letter applying, and basically my letter, I still have the draft of that letter from all those years ago, was saying, if you give me a shot, I'll work really hard. This is what I do. This is some of the things that I've done in my carpet cleaning role, not a lot of synergies. And they offered me an interview, and they told me that I was one of 12 people interviewed out of a field of 300 plus applicants, and they actually didn't give me the job, but they referred me on to two other organizations, two other banks, and all three of them were banks in the city. I'll name them: Hungarian International Bank, Saudi International Bank, and Nordic Bank. Those are the three banks. And Saudi International Bank offered me a role as a junior admin. I think my I can't remember the exact title, but just sort of junior administrator. And it was actually paying me a little bit less than the Nordic Bank role, but I really liked the environment. So I decided, let's go for it. And it happened to be in asset management. And of course, I had no idea what asset management was at the time. So there I was, at the age of 19, literally falling into banking, falling into asset management. And 30 plus years later, worked my way through the ranks.
Fantastic. So how did your career develop from then? Did you sort of find a spark and enthusiasm for asset management? You know, what was it that kept you going?
So I think my attitude actually is whatever I'm doing, I'm going to do really well. So, you know, I worked in a hairdresser when I was at school, but I was really enthusiastic and, well, just sweeping up hair and washing hair and stuff, but I loved it and put my back into it. And then the carpet cleaning role, you know, door-to-door salesperson, that's a hard job, but it's a really good discipline, and it's sort of an eat what you kill discipline. So if you don't you know, bring in any business, then you don't pay the rent. But also I was very, very focused on making sure that I only sold what was sort of right for people to buy. So there was, you know, I was very, you know, integrity has always been one of my sort of key drivers. So when I was in asset management, it's the same thing. I just wanted to be the best that I could be. And I think it'd be fair to say that I wasn't ambitious, and I actually am not ambitious. And a lot of people sort of think that's, you know, the antithesis of the journey that I've been on. But I've just really wanted to do the best, and because I want to do the best, I actually enjoy every part of the journey. So it wasn't there with a catalyst that says, oh, this is the job, I'm going to stay in this industry. It was sort of day by day, year by year, and then as time went by, decade by decade, and I just loved what I did, and I always have.
That's fantastic. You know, it's that attitude of just be the best that you can be. I think is a great message to share with others on that sort of aspiration to get into leadership position. So how did that go then? You started off, you're working in the UK. How did your career develop, and when did you move to the United States?
I started in the early 80s in the UK, and I worked there for 7 years, and the organization, the bank that I worked for, was in the early 90s, like the dark days of the 90s. There was a lot of the banks were trying to, you know, clear off their balance sheet, sell the businesses that they could sell to shore up the balance sheet. And I worked for one of the banks that did that, and they sold the asset management business that I worked for to another bank. And that bank gave me two options: either to work in their business in the city, or to work in their US business. And I'd actually gone over to the US business like a couple of months before, and I just loved it. So for me, that was a no-brainer. So in 1991, I packed up my bags, sold my house. In fact, I sold everything and just moved to New York with, you know, a bunch of suitcases. And that took me to the US. And I knew that once I was there, I wasn't going to come back. But I mean, I guess here I am. I did eventually. And I worked in that organization until the late 90s. And then there was some merger activity, and, you know, jobs were, you know, changed and so forth. So I looked for another opportunity, worked in another asset management business, more on the client side and the business development side. So originally, from the admin, I went to an investment role. So I was actually investing money, global fixed income portfolios. So I was managing money for, I think, maybe 12, 14 years, something like that. And then I moved over to the client service business development side, which, you know, I loved even more because I really liked the sort of the client engagement. And I worked with central banks. So one of the things with central banks is there's just one in every country. So I spent a lot of my life on the plane. So 3 weeks out of 4, I was running around the world, but I loved it. It was a really, really interesting role. And eventually in that organization, I was offered the CEO shot. So I took took that role and managed that business for 3 years. But I was offered the role in 2008, which you might remember was a bit of a tough year for banking. So I had to do quite a lot of navigation, and in the year following, we merged with another business. So it was a very interesting time. And then in 2011, I moved on to another CEO role for another bank running the asset management business in the Americas. And that was the role that I left in 2020, just at the start of COVID. So quite it's sort of a thematic journey, because it's always been with asset management, but I've done so many things within that business that it's actually been quite varied.
So within that, as you've journeyed up into leadership roles, and in particular in a turbulent time surrounding 2008 and the financial crisis, were there any lessons learned along the way, or sort of surprises or challenges you encountered? I know one of the things we talk a lot about on the podcast is actually people being an exciting thing, and sometimes a challenge when it comes to managing and leading people. But was there anything on your side that stands out to you as, that was a really good learning lesson?
Oh my gosh, so where do I start on this? Like, almost every day is a learning journey. So maybe I should sort of start off with actually getting into that role. So when I was asked to step into the CEO role in my first CEO role, I think it was sort of mid-year, something like that. They asked me whether I would step into this role, and my first response was no, and my second response was like no, and my third response was no, and all of the no's came from the fact that I couldn't visualize myself in that role. I felt like, wait a minute, I'm an investment person, or I'm a client person, I'm not CEO. And it took somebody on the outside to say, well, look at who's in the role at the moment. Do you think you could do that job? And do you think you could maybe do better job? And I thought, yeah, I could. So I take the role. So it took from sort of May to October, or maybe it was June, something like that, to October, to actually persuade me to take the role, which sounds sort of a little arrogant to say that people were persuading me, but there were a lot of circumstances going on there. So the first learning is for other people is like, it's one of the hard things is visualizing something if you can't really see yourself in it. And one of the things that I try to do quite a lot of, as much as I can, is role modeling, because so many people don't get to see what really goes on in a financial firm or in a bank, and there's not enough role models that look like me or that sound like me. So I think it's really important to get out there as much as you can, just to show people that you don't have to be what the traditional CEO looks like in order to be able to run a significant business, or to run a financial organization, or to run a bank. So that was a huge learning for me, and that's really informed me as I've sort of gone on over the next several years.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast, is you realise leaders are human. Everyone's human. Everyone's got their quirks. Just because someone isn't exactly like you doesn't mean you couldn't do a better job or as good as. Brilliant. So thinking about that particularly challenging time around 2008, I imagine leading an organisation through such substantial change, and so much that's beyond your control as an individual, so much happening in the external environment. How did you manage that? Was there anything in the way you approached sort of leading and managing your teams to help guide them through what must have been a challenging situation as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, remember also I have my like trainer wheels on as a leader there as well. But I think there are certain things which just sort of transcend all of that, and that is, you need to instill confidence in your team, and that was an extremely challenging time. And particularly people who manage money, and portfolios were going down. There were investment losses, and investment professionals have a real passion for their portfolios and a real ownership of their portfolios. So it was really important to make sure that everybody had that balance between, this is what's happening, but make sure you don't take it home with you as much as you can, that these are out of your control. So that was the first thing. Second thing, and again, it's not just 2008, it's all the time, is communication. Communication to the team, communication to your clients, communication to your stakeholders. there was a lot of unhappy clients at that time because markets were going down a lot of losses, and you just got to confront it head on and just tell everybody how it is, what's happening. No spin, none of the stuff that you might say. Just be transparent and straight with everybody that's around you, and just keep communicating. I think that was a huge thing.
I imagine there's lots of parallels with the recent experience of coronavirus, with, again, things being out of control and the need for authenticity. But before we get to that, you mentioned at the start that you took a sort of change of direction. You undertook a master's degree in international development. Was there a particular moment that prompted you wanting to take this up, or was it something that you'd wanted to do for a long time? What was the inspiration there?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit as well on this question. So I took a master's degree in 2013 in organizational psychology. So actually, let's go back even further. So I failed my A levels, didn't get into college. So that was the young me. And then the 30-year-old me thought, I should really get some qualifications, because not that I actually really needed it for my job, because I was already doing pretty nicely there. But in the US, and probably it's a bit like that over here now, here in the UK now, is that if you didn't have a degree, people, particularly when you're in a professional role, people looked at you had two heads. It's like, what? And also, one of the first questions, like, what's your name? What do you do? And where did you go to school? Those are college. Those are the sort of opening questions. So I always felt pretty stupid saying, well, actually, I didn't go to school. So when I was in my 30s, I did my undergrad degree, did that out of hours. And then when I took my second CEO role, I thought, well, I'm sort of leading by I don't know whether this is a British expression, leading by the seat of my pants. So I thought maybe I need to learn about leadership. So I took a master's in organizational psychology with specialization in change leadership. And I loved it. It was just so interesting. And I'd also loved doing my undergrad degree. So then I thought, learning, sort of continuous learner. And then I had some conversations with, actually it was over here, with some very prominent people in international development here. And the chair of the board, I was asking, well, how did you get on your journey? Because he was in the finance field as well. And he said, well, I went to LSE and I took a master's in international development, and God, look at me now, I'm chair of the board. So I thought, ooh, that's pretty interesting. And I chewed it over for a few years, and then I was like, you know what, that is exactly what I want to do. So I did.
Fantastic. And with that, having completed the degree, when we were looking at opportunities, what was it that attracted you to Unity Trust Bank? Because obviously a different country, going to a different part of the world in the middle of a pandemic, that must have been a pretty big decision to make. What was it that made you think, that's the one, that's the role for me?
Well, the first, so there was like a cascade of decisions. So decision one was I wanted to be in a role that had impact. Decision number two was I didn't actually care where in the world I lived. And decision number three was Unity Trust Bank. So the Unity Trust Bank was direct impact. And I looked at a number of other roles, and they had impact, but it was helping other people have impact. And, maybe I'm just selfish. I wanted to have the impact myself. So I thought that running the bank, with the financial background that I have, then, I've got that one sort of covered. And impact, it would be just such a really wonderful opportunity for me to explore what else we could do. And it's an extremely well-run bank, and it was, run by my predecessor did a really fabulous job growing the bank, building the bank, setting the impact framework, did a lot of great things. And it was just a really great opportunity to take something really good and see how we could build it further and what more we could do. So then that took me over here. And, within it was just a couple of months from that first conversation to getting off the plane at Birmingham International Airport. And I did look around me and say, oof, gosh, what have I done? But it's been really wonderful. It's been really wonderful.
And how did you find moving back to the UK after all these years? Had you been to Birmingham before taking the role, or was that literally your first visit?
Well, so I have family in Kidderminster, so I'd been there, and I'd driven through Birmingham, but I'd never really spent any time in Birmingham. And it's been quite difficult, not difficult, it's been quite strange coming back. And I'm, I've been here since May now, so, 8 months, 9 months. But at the beginning, it was being a foreigner in my own country. And it was so interesting because I sort of speak with the right accent. So unless anybody knows my history, then nobody would know that I've been out of the country for 30 years. Maybe there's a bit of an American twang from time to time, but yeah, for the most part. So working out, how much a stamp costs or getting myself re-registered with the NHS. And, for someone who's been in banking for so many years, I couldn't get a credit card because I didn't have any credit over here, or my credit was in the US. So all of these things were all kind of strange, but I'm settling in and, getting used to it and getting much more familiar with the whole environment and the sort of British structure.
And what's your first impressions of Birmingham as a proper sort of, as an employee in the city rather than just driving through?
Yeah, well, so I'm a little ashamed to confess that I actually haven't looked around very much. I've been to we were sort of working remotely for the first several months. We had a couple of months where we came back to the office, and the office is in a really lovely place. It's in Brindley Place by the canals. So I sort of looked a little bit around there, but didn't venture out too much. And then we kind of went back to remote again. So the second time we went back to remote, we're just opening up again this week. But the second time I thought, okay, that was a missed opportunity. So I did go to the movie theatre once. Cinema. I did go to the cinema once. And that was by the canals. That was very nice. But I really haven't looked around. So my 2022 mission is to get to know Birmingham much better. Looking for recommendations.
We've got plenty. We'll have to take you on a chamber tour of Birmingham because there is an awful lot to see and do. So on obviously leading an organisation, coming to the UK, moving country, leading an organisation, middle of the pandemic, how has that been for you as a leader, as you're trying to establish the relationship with your teams, as you're trying to get to know the business? How have you found that coming in during this utterly bizarre time?
Well, it would suddenly have been easier if we were in the office, if everybody was in the office. I think that most people are pretty adept with using Zoom and Teams and so forth now. It's hard to build those relationships. And, the thing that you miss, that I miss, is the casual conversation. So, you're learning everybody's name, you're learning everybody's role, and you're just looking at faces, and you're interacting over Zoom. It's a whole different thing from being in the office. I think I've got there. And ask the team, they'll tell you whether I've got there or not. But it would be it would just have been so much easier to be meeting people in the office, and not everybody's coming in. So even when we were open, people have varying circumstances. And I think now that we've just coming out of yet another lockdown, it's a confidence factor, and a comfort factor. So I think more and more of the team will spend some time in the office. We're not going to push it, we're not going to force it. Everybody has to do what's within their comfort zone. But personally, I very much like being in the office. So it'll, it's great for me to interact when I am in, and to actually get to know people, and not just the formality of Zoom, the informality, and the leaning over the desk chit chat and learning a bit more about who everyone is, rather than just the role and the things that we need to talk about over in a more formal Zoom type of environment.
Absolutely. Zoom's very efficient for working through an agenda, isn't it? But if you're looking to get to know people, it's those side conversations, the little catch-ups on how was your weekend, how are your family, all of that is just so important, as well as the generating ideas between teams. But Thinking about Unity Trust Bank, you talked at the start about how important the socially motivated purpose of Unity Trust Bank is, and how purpose has played an important part in your career and your journey and your decisions. Obviously, a lot of businesses are thinking more and more around environmental and social governance, their own sense of purpose and what that is and how they communicate that. What does purpose in business really mean to you?
I mean, if you go back to the roots of banking, the whole purpose of banking is to provide financing for people to help build their business and to grow their businesses. And on the other side of it, to take care of people's money and help them grow their money. And I think that a lot of the thought behind our role is here to help people as organizations get bigger and more complex, and quite often the customer and what you're really there for gets sort of lost along the way. So that's a really important thing for us. And I think that any organization that talks about caring for their customer and caring for their clients, and every organization does, needs to think about it in terms of what are the things that a client really wants, what are the things that are going to help our customers, and what are the things that are going to help our customers help other people as well. So you can argue in sort of the purest form that if you create a job, that's creating impact. If that was the case, then maybe we'd be lending to Amazon because they're creating so many jobs, but that's actually not what it's really about. So we're really focusing on those organizations that are taking a position to better society. So, focus on the housing associations, which provides housing to people that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it, or care homes that take care of young people, or take care of people with mental health issues, or take care of the elderly, or the CDFIs, the community finance organizations. So we provide some funding there, and their purpose is providing funding for organizations that wouldn't otherwise have access to any funds. So there's a lot of ways that organizations can pay it forward, and it doesn't mean that you compromise the bottom line. It really doesn't. It just means that you think about the two things as they go hand in hand rather than only one.
So what's next for Unity Trust Bank? What are your hopes and ambitions for the coming years? Now, fingers crossed, we're coming out of the most turbulent part of the pandemic, hopefully in that more stable, not quite post-pandemic, but perhaps endemic period that we're heading into. What are your ambitions for Unity Trust Bank?
Well, we're very clear on who we are. We know what we do. We're actually pretty straightforward. It's not a complex structure. So I would want us to do more of the same. Where create as much impact as we can, focus on those clients who are creating their impact and see how we can help them. Looking at measurements, that's quite important to us. So just to be able to formally demonstrate the impact that we have. So we're looking at like different measurement frameworks, and that one's a tricky one because you can count the number of beds in a care home, but that may not necessarily be the right way of measuring the impact on that. So we're doing a lot of work and putting a lot of thought around that. And then we're also talking to our customers to say, what is it that we do that you like, and what is it that we do that you don't like, and what is it that you want? So we're taking some of the, what is it you want, and seeing what we can do with that. And a big part of that is technology. So we need to, digitize ourselves. So that's the journey that we're already on.
So thinking back through all of this now, your journey right from the beginning, right through to where you are now, thinking about the future of Unity Trust Bank, are there any leaders that have inspired you along this journey, or individuals, in fact?
I'm enormously inspired by prominent women, and some of the women who've inspired me are not sort of obvious, but I sort of hero worship some of the female war reporters like Kate Adie from before, and Christiana Amanpour. I absolutely applaud what they're doing, trailblazers. I've had leaders along the way in my organization who I didn't even sort of realize it at the time. But again, it goes back to what I was saying about role models, that they were role models. And it never occurred to me that I couldn't do these things because I saw somebody that looked like me doing that. So, way back when, 35 plus years ago, the head of the department was a woman, Betsy Moss, who sadly passed away many years ago. But she was a driven leader running an asset management business within the organization. And I thought, one day I want to be like Betsy Moss. Now, I've kind of got there and actually probably done a little more because the organization I've worked for are like larger organizations, but she was somebody who very early on in my career sort of put an imprint on me, and she probably has absolutely no idea, and her family probably have absolutely no idea. And actually on that point, even now I'll get some out of the blue contacts through LinkedIn or through email or something like that from somebody who says, I remember back whenever it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you told me this and this happened and this is where I am now and you were so instrumental. And I'm thinking, my gosh, that was just, I may not even remember it, but so I think all of us have to be so cognizant of the impact that we have on others, whether we know it or not, and make sure that impact is only a positive impact.
And on that, thinking of the role model role you've played in so many people's careers, the advice you may have given along the way, if you could offer just one piece of advice to an aspiring CEO, what would it be?
So the advice would be, don't focus on the title, focus on the content. What is it that you want to do and who is it that you want to be and how is it that you want to do it? And that might take you to a role that has, C-suite in the title, or it might not, but just focus on content of the role. And you asked for one, but I'm going to give you two. The second one will not surprise you. It's just be the best that you can be.
Fantastic. Deborah, thank you so much for talking us through your journey today. It's been inspiring, it's been motivating, and that's fantastic practical advice for our listeners to take away as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Of course, for all those listening, remember you can download CEO Stories wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to follow us on the social media channels, Twitter, that's at GRB Ham Chambers, LinkedIn, Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, for the latest news and updates from the Chamber.